Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into an event that honestly sounds like pure fiction, but I assure you is a heavily documented historical reality. We're going to strip away the myths and piece together exactly how one of history's most bizarre anomalies actually unfolded. So picture this for a second. Imagine an entirely ordinary, sweltering summer day. People are just going about their grueling daily chores, trying to survive. And then, completely out of nowhere, someone starts to dance. And they don't stop. They actually can't stop. What if that single, solitary act of dancing mutated into an impossible, exhausting epidemic? What if dozens and then hundreds of people found themselves locked in an uncontrollable trance, dancing until their bodies literally gave out? It sounds like a scene straight out of a horror movie, right? But as we're about to see, this was a very real, very documented nightmare. All right, part one. The bizarre summer of 1518, an impossible epidemic. When confronted with an entire population basically losing control of their own motor functions, we have to ask some critical questions here. Why did they dance uncontrollably? Was this the sudden outbreak of a terrifying new neurological disease? Was it a massive, unprecedented wave of mass hysteria just sweeping through a super vulnerable population? Could it have been, say, accidental poisoning from the local food supply? Or are we looking at something else entirely, a phenomenon that science still can't fully explain? Definitely keep these possibilities in the back of your mind as we look at the evidence. Let's set the stage in part two, Strasbourg's grim reality, the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so Strasbourg back then? Definitely not a comfortable, thriving metropolis by modern standards. These citizens were living under unimaginable stress. I mean, we're talking crushing poverty, where just securing enough food for the day was a monumental struggle. Add in rampant disease, which was a constant shadow over daily life. They'd also recently endured severe famine, leaving the population malnourished and physically weak. And layered on top of all of this intense physical suffering were these very deep, ingrained religious beliefs. Life was a constant tightrope walk between the fear of starvation, the fear of plague, and the fear of divine punishment. It really makes you wonder how much psychological pressure a human mind can take before it simply breaks. Which brings us to part three. Frau Troffea steps out. Patient 0. This entire epidemic starts right here. According to the records, a solitary woman named Frau Troffea steps out of her home and simply begins dancing in the narrow, crowded streets of Strasbourg. No music, no band, no holiday celebration. Just a bizarre, fervent physical compulsion. She danced alone, twisting and turning, her feet hitting the cobblestones hour after hour. You really have to imagine the neighbors watching her, probably thinking, she just had one too many ales. But then the sun set, and she just kept going. She was completely trapped in her own unstoppable rhythm. Moving into part 4, the contagion spreads, an escalating crisis. Just track this progression with me, because it escalates fast. For the first few days, Frau Troffea dances alone, a disturbing but totally isolated anomaly. But as days turn into weeks, the compulsion begins to jump. Dozens of people suddenly join in. They drop their tools, they leave their homes, and they begin mirroring her frantic, uncontrollable movements. And by the time a month has passed, the situation has spiraled into an absolute nightmare. Hundreds of citizens are now dancing uncontrollably in the streets. This isolated incident completely mutated into a mass crisis. Now, I know it's incredibly easy to hear this story and just dismiss it as some exaggerated medieval folktale. But we know this happened for sure because of the meticulous paperwork. Local officials, doctors, the clergy, they all documented this baffling phenomenon as absolute undeniable fact. They were writing these desperate reports about hundreds of their own citizens who were literally dancing themselves to pieces. Which leads perfectly into part 5, a fatal treatment, the medical response. I really want you to follow the bizarre logic the local officials used here. Step 1, they evaluate the suffering dancers and fundamentally misdiagnose the whole affliction. Based on medieval medical theories, they decided that the dancers were suffering from hot blood. So naturally, the only way to cure them was to let them burn off that heat, right? They needed to dance more. So step 2, they actually clear out the grain markets and construct massive public wooden stages for the sufferers. And step 3, the most surreal detail of all, they crack open the city coffers and actually hire professional musicians, pipers, and drummers to play around the clock to keep the afflicted moving. Yes, their actual medical solution to people dancing to death was to throw a taxpayer-funded rave. And this brilliantly illustrates the tragic irony of the whole situation. The cure becomes the ultimate catalyst. By building these stages right in the center of the city and providing constant, pounding music, the authorities didn't cure a single person. They accidentally created a massive, highly visible spectacle. The rhythmic music and the sheer sight of hundreds thrashing around on stage drew even more people into the frenzy. The treatment basically threw gasoline directly onto the fire, ensuring the contagion reached its absolute peak. And the physical toll of this catalyst was frankly gruesome. I mean, the human body just is not built to sustain constant cardiovascular exertion for days on end, especially under a hot summer sun. As the music played on, inevitable biological realities took hold. Total exhaustion, severe dehydration. People were dancing on battered, bleeding feet until their leg bones literally splintered. And ultimately, heart failure. Hundreds of people danced until they just collapsed into the dirt, their bodies totally broken by this inescapable compulsion. It was a fatal physical catastrophe.
And that brings us to part 6, an unsolved mystery, history's strangest epidemic.
So here is the absolutely crucial point to take away from all this. Knowing what happened is one thing. Thanks to the meticulous records of those panicked city officials, we know the terrifying facts of what went down in Strasbourg. We know about Frau Troffea, we know about the wooden stages, and we know about the collapse. But understanding why it happened, that is an entirely different ballgame. Establishing the timeline is really only half the mystery. The facts are undeniable, but the root cause still remains a shadow. Was it a dangerously tainted food supply? Or did the crushing psychological pressure of their grim reality finally just snap their minds? Or is there some darker medical reality still hiding in the historical archives? Well, we are going to dive headfirst into the science and psychology to uncover the truth in part 2.
Welcome to another Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating historical cold case, one where we're going to take some complex historical and scientific puzzle pieces and put them together. We're traveling way back to the summer of 1518, right to the streets of Strasbourg. The event we're about to investigate is honestly so bizarre, so completely defying of normal human behavior that it's just baffled medical historians and psychologists for literally centuries. It's this incredible mystery that bridges the gap between medieval superstition and modern science. Let's get right into it.
For more than 500 years, historians and scientists have searched for one answer.
Why did hundreds of people dance until they collapsed? Seriously, just think about this sheer physical impossibility of it. We're not talking about a few people swaying to some music here. We are talking about a full-on epidemic of frantic, uncontrollable movement sweeping through a population. Men, women, and kids just driven to total exhaustion, moving for days on end with bleeding feet, totally unable to stop themselves until their bodies just simply gave out. It's wild, right?
Now, to actually solve this, we first have to get inside the heads of the people who lived through it. To the folks in 1518 Strasbourg, this wasn't a medical crisis. To them, it was deeply supernatural. They blamed curses, demonic possession, and divine punishment. And honestly, if you lived in a world before germ theory, before modern neuroscience, and you suddenly saw your neighbors just thrashing uncontrollably in the streets, you'd probably assume demons were involved too. These explanations perfectly reflected their reality. But today, we've got modern scientific understanding to apply to this historical crime scene.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, Biological Causes. Let's look at suspect number 1.
At first, scientists thought a chemical culprit was to blame, specifically ergot fungus. Ergot is this toxic mold that grows on damp rye stalks. When you bake that infected rye into bread and eat it, it causes something called ergotism. And the symptoms? We're talking terrifying hallucinations, severe muscle spasms, and highly erratic behavior. Now, given that the poor in 1518 Strasbourg pretty much survived entirely on a diet of rye bread, well, it makes perfect logical sense on paper, doesn't it? It kind of looks like a closed case.
But hold on, because this theory completely falls apart under closer inspection. Why? Because ergot poisoning severely restricts blood flow to your extremities. It actually makes your limbs gangrenous. It causes a deeply debilitating illness, definitely not superhuman physical endurance. I mean, if you're poisoned by ergot, you are bedridden and in absolute agony. You simply don't have the blood circulation or the energy to do prolonged, coordinated aerobic exercise for days on end. Plus, the spasms of ergotism look like seizures, not dancing. So we can cross that one out.
So if it wasn't some toxic fungus lurking in the food supply, we've got to look deeper into the human body itself. The neurological theory asks, could a mass brain disorder be to blame? Some medical historians suggested that, hey, maybe a really rare neurological disorder just swept through the town.
But you guessed it, this theory also hits some massive scientific roadblocks. Think about it.
The simultaneous onset of a neurological disorder in hundreds of people all at once? That is highly atypical. Neurological disorders just don't have a mechanism for infectious, rapid spread through a community the way a cold or a flu does. And, more importantly, this theory completely ignores the cultural elements of the whole event. A random mass brain glitch really doesn't explain why people were doing a localized, culturally recognizable style of dancing.
All right, so we've ruled out demonic possession, we've scientifically dismantled the chemical fungus poisoning idea, and we've crossed massive neurological disorders off our list. So what really caused it?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is our next avenue of investigation. Section 2, the prime suspect, which is the human mind. This points us away from the physical body and directly toward our own psychology.
And this brings us to the leading scientific theory agreed upon by modern medical historians: mass psychogenic illness, which is historically known as mass hysteria. Now, let's break this definition down into plain English. This isn't just people faking it, not at all. This is the rapid, totally unconscious spread of very real physical symptoms among a close-knit group of people. But here is the key takeaway. It's triggered by intense psychological stress, not a physical virus or a bacteria. It's basically the human brain buckling under so much external pressure that it literally forces physical symptoms to manifest in the body.
And guys, the residents of Strasbourg in 1518 were caught in the ultimate psychological pressure cooker. It was the perfect storm. First, you had extreme psychological stress. The early 1500s were just brutal. We're talking starvation, widespread disease, and unending misery. Second, you add in severe social and cultural pressures. This was a highly cohesive, tightly bound community, meaning everyone felt the collective trauma together deeply. And third, layered right on top of all that physical suffering were their deep, terrifying religious fears.
So the crucial point is this specific religious fear. The people of this region held a really deep-seated belief in a figure named Saint Vitus. According to local mythology, if Saint Vitus was angered, he would curse sinners with an uncontrollable dancing plague. Just imagine that for a second. Imagine living in a time of unprecedented suffering, feeling immense guilt, and genuinely believing a saint is just waiting to strike you down with a dancing curse. That terror planted a very specific psychological seed. When one person finally broke under the stress and began to move, the highly suggestible, traumatized minds of the rest of the community saw it. They recognized the curse, and their own minds unconsciously triggered the exact same physical response. It spread like wildfire.
Now, while this sounds incredibly bizarre to us today, the dancing plague of 1518 is actually not an isolated incident. Throughout history, similar psychological outbreaks and episodes of collective behavior have popped up across the globe during times of intense trauma. From laughing epidemics to fainting sicknesses in tight-knit communities, the human brain actually has a really well-documented history of broadcasting physical distress signals when pushed past its absolute breaking point. So this isn't just some weird glitch in their 16th century minds. It's a profound, universal feature of the human condition.
Of course, because we obviously can't put a 16th century patient into an MRI machine, absolute certainty remains impossible. But modern historians agree that mass psychogenic illness is by far the most plausible, evidence-based explanation we've got. The dancing plague stands as one of history's most extraordinary, undeniable examples of just how powerfully our minds, our society, and our physical health are all intertwined. Your brain can and literally will hijack your body if the psychological environment demands it. 500 years later, the streets of Strasbourg are quiet once again. Yet the mystery of the dancing plague reminds us that history is filled with events that challenge everything we think we know about the human mind. This has been Mystery Vault. Until next time, keep questioning history. Which leaves us with one final thought for this explainer. We look back at 1518 and we tend to think of it as this distant medieval anomaly. But the underlying mechanics of mass psychogenic illness are still very much a part of our neurobiology right now. So in our current era of unprecedented digital connection and mounting global pressures, we have to ask, how fragile is the modern human mind to extreme social stress and collective behavior today? I'll let you ponder that one. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you next time.